A small town in Montana, USA, where winter stretches long, blanketing everything in white. The town nestles quietly among the Rockies, peaceful yet lonely. I didn't think today would be anything special. Honestly, every day felt the same to me, waking up, opening my old bookstore, and finding ways to kill time. That monotonous routine had trapped me ever since Ethan, my husband, passed away 8 years ago. People said I was strong for getting through it. But if I were truly strong, would I feel this empty? I didn't cry or complain. My loneliness was a quiet, smoldering thing, like the first snow falling silently on a rooftop. Willow Creek wasn't a big town, but it was big enough for me to avoid people when I needed to. After all these years, I'd stopped caring about making friends or opening up to anyone. I liked the quiet, the way winter softened all the sounds. That day, I left the store earlier than usual because the forecast warned of a snowstorm. My only plan was to grab a few groceries from the convenience store near my house before nightfall. I wasn't expecting much when I pushed open the glass door, but then I saw him. Ryan, the store's delivery man. He was stacking boxes near the aisle. Tall, broad-shouldered, with wavy black hair dusted with a few unmelted snowflakes. He wore a thick forescreen coat, but I could still make out the contours of his muscles underneath. Ryan bent down to lift a box, and the fluorescent light above cast a glow on his face. His blue eyes were deep and shimmering, like a frozen lake under the sun. I don't know how long I stood there, only that my heart was beating faster than usual. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred inside me, something I hadn't felt in 8 years. "Ma'am, do you need any help?" His voice was warm and deep, like a cup of hot coffee on a frigid winter's day. I startled, realizing I had been staring at him so intently that I hadn't noticed I was blocking the aisle. "Oh, no. I was just looking for the milk aisle," I stammered, clutching my purse like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Ryan smiled, a soft, warm smile that seemed to make everything around us pause for a moment. "The milk aisle is over there," he said, pointing. "Let me show you." I followed him past the shelves, wondering how a stranger could make me feel so flustered. We didn't talk much, but his presence was enough to brighten the space around us. When we reached the checkout, he stood behind the counter, quickly packing my items into paper bags. "Next time, if you need anything, just call the store. I can deliver it to your place." "Thank you," I replied, feeling my cheeks grow warm despite the freezing air outside. As I stepped out of the store, the biting wind grazed my face, but my heart felt oddly warm. I couldn't explain what drew me to Ryan, but I knew one thing: for the first time in years, I felt alive. I glanced back over my shoulder. Ryan was still at the counter, his eyes seemingly following me. I smiled softly, then hurried toward my car, feeling as though my heart had just been awakened. That day, the snow fell thick and heavy, but to me, it was the first day life felt meaningful again. The snowstorm had arrived, blanketing the town of Willow Creek in white. The main roads were deserted, with only the faint glow of streetlights piercing through the thick snow. Inside my small house, the fireplace crackled with warmth, its flames dancing on the old wooden walls. I sat by the window, watching the snow pile up outside. The town now looked like a scene from a Christmas postcard. Pristine snow coated the rooftops, and tree branches sagged under the weight, bowing as if in greeting to winter. The steam from the hot tea in my hands curled upward, warming my cold fingers. But my mind refused to stay still. Ryan's image lingered in my thoughts, his warm smile, his sparkling eyes, and the way he made me feel like a woman again, not just a lonely shadow. I was lost in my thoughts when a strange sound interrupted, the heavy, urgent knock of someone at the door. Placing my tea down, I hurried to the door, my breath condensing in the icy air. As I opened it, a blast of cold wind rushed in, bringing with it swirling snowflakes. Standing there was Ryan, his coat dusted with snow, and wet strands of hair clinging to his forehead. "Ryan?" I exclaimed in surprise, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sorry to bother you, but my truck broke down nearby," he said, his breath visible in the freezing air. "I couldn't stay out there any longer." Can I stay here for a bit? Without hesitation, I nodded. Come in, it's too cold out there. Ryan stepped inside, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. He shrugged off his heavy coat, revealing a damp sweater beneath, his shoulders and chest soaked. I led him to the fireplace, where the golden flames lit up his strong features and those mesmerizing blue eyes. You live here alone? Ryan asked, holding his hands out to the fire for warmth. Yes, it's been a while now, I replied, tossing more wood into the fire. And you? Why were you making deliveries in a storm like this? Ryan gave a small chuckle, one that made my heart feel warmer than the fire. Work, I guess. But I think I was too reckless this time. I looked at him, noticing droplets of water falling from his hair. Wait here. I'll grab a towel. I returned with a soft towel and stood before him. He leaned forward slightly as I began to dry his wet hair. My hands brushed through the soft strands, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The space between us seemed to shrink, leaving only the crackle of the fire and our quiet breaths. Thank you, Ryan said, his voice low and warm. It's nothing. I think you could use a cup of hot tea too, I replied, trying to hide my nervousness at being so close to him. Ryan nodded, his gaze following me as I walked to the kitchen. I could feel his eyes on me, and a strange, unfamiliar sensation stirred in my chest. We sat by the window, each holding a cup of tea. Outside, the snowstorm raged on, but inside, the atmosphere was strangely quiet and warm. Have you ever thought about leaving this town? Ryan asked, his gaze following the snowflakes tumbling past the window. I shook my head, my eyes lowering to the tea in my hands. I wouldn't know where to go if I left. Willow Creek is the only place where I feel like I can keep going. Ryan was silent for a moment, then spoke softly, I feel the same. But sometimes, I think maybe we just need someone to remind us that life still has so much worth cherishing. I turned to look at him. Our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Late into the night, the storm began to calm. Ryan stood up, putting his coat back on. I don't think my truck will start now. I should probably walk home, he said. Are you kidding? I exclaimed, stepping closer to him. It's still freezing out there. Just stay here. I have a guest room, it's warm enough to get through the night. Ryan hesitated, but my sincere expression seemed to convince him. He nodded. Thank you. Really, thank you. I smiled, feeling something in my heart begin to melt, like the snow outside the window. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind howl against the windows, I didn't feel lonely anymore. Ryan was here, in this little house, and I knew his presence had changed something inside me, a spark I hadn't dared to name yet, but could feel growing brighter, like the glow of a fire in the depths of a cold winter. Outside, the snowstorm continued to bury the town of Willow Creek in white, but inside the small house, the fireplace crackled warmly, its light dancing on the old wooden walls. The space was quiet, yet between Ryan and me, there was a strange tension, like a smoldering flame waiting to ignite. I couldn't sleep. The entire house was silent except for the occasional crackling of burning wood and the howl of the wind outside the windows. I slipped out of my room, pulling on a thick sweater, and crept softly down the stairs. Ryan was still awake. He sat in an old armchair in the living room, the firelight casting shadows across his face, highlighting his sharp features and blue eyes that seemed to hold the entire winter sky. He turned when he heard my footsteps. Can't sleep? He asked, his deep, slightly raspy voice filled with warmth despite a hint of weariness. I shook my head and sat down in the chair across from him. I think tonight's not meant for sleeping. And you? Ryan shrugged, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I'm used to staying up late. Nights like this, they make me think. I studied him as his gaze remained fixed on the fire, as though searching for something in its flickering depths. What do you think about? I asked softly, not wanting to break the fragile quiet between us. Ryan smiled faintly, a hint of sadness in the curve of his lips. About family. I never really had a place I could call home. But here, I feel different. I didn't know what compelled me to open up, but the words spilled out. I told him about Ethan, about the happy years we shared, and about the fateful day that took him from me forever. Ryan listened silently, his eyes gentle and understanding. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment before speaking quietly. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. Hearing my name on his lips felt like a whisper of warmth, stirring something deep within me. No, I'm just trying to survive each day, I replied, offering a faint, bittersweet smile. Ryan shook his head. You're not just surviving. You're living. And that matters more than you realize. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them shimmer like precious gems. In that moment, the world around us seemed to dissolve, leaving only us and the fragile spark of something new beginning to grow. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window frame. Ryan stood up and walked over to check the door. The firelight illuminated his tall frame, emphasizing his broad shoulders. Do you want to do something crazy? He asked suddenly, turning back to me with a glint of boldness in his eyes. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. Something crazy like what? Ryan smiled, a smile that could melt even the thickest snow in my heart. Go outside. We could walk in the snow. Maybe you'll see something different. You're kidding, right? It's freezing out there, I started to protest, but the eager sparkle in his eyes made me pause. And then I thought, why not? We bundled up in thick coats and scarves, stepping out into the snowy night. The snow was still falling, each large flake landing softly, forming a pristine white carpet beneath our feet. Ryan led me down a narrow path, the dim glow of streetlights guiding our way. The silence was so profound I could hear our footsteps crunching in the snow. Do you often do crazy things like this? I asked, my voice tinged with laughter. Only when I want to remind myself that I'm alive, Ryan replied, turning to look at me. And I think you need that, too. We stopped at the edge of a frozen lake. Ryan picked up a stick and began tracing patterns in the snow covering the ice. What's that? I asked, watching the lines he drew. Ryan smiled, his eyes sparkling in the dim light. A reminder that while snow can erase our footprints, it can't erase what we create in each other's hearts. I stood there, speechless. His words touched a hidden corner of my soul. When we returned to the house, my hands were numb from the cold, but my heart felt unusually warm. I prepared 2 mugs of hot cocoa, and we sat by the fireplace, enveloped in a comfortable silence. I glanced at Ryan. The firelight reflected in his eyes, and I felt as though I were staring into a deep, endless ocean. Thank you, I whispered. Ryan looked at me, his eyes kind and sincere. For what? For making me feel alive again. He didn't respond, just smiled, a smile that held 1,000 unspoken words. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel lonely for the first time in years. Something inside me had shifted, something warm and tender like a quiet flame, burning steadily in the cold of the winter night. The snowstorm had eased, but the air outside remained bone-chillingly cold. The morning light glistened on the snow-covered streets of Willow Creek. In my small wooden house, the air between Ryan and me felt different. Something unspoken yet undeniable lingered, silent, powerful, and impossible to ignore. I woke up early, the pale sunlight filtering through the curtains and bathing the room in a gentle glow. I made my way downstairs, still wrapped in my thick sweater, but froze as I approached the kitchen. Ryan was there, his back turned to me. He was wearing an old sweater I had left for guests, his broad shoulders and tall frame illuminated by the soft morning light. What are you doing? I asked, surprised to see him setting up the breakfast table. Ryan turned, a small smile on his lips. I found some eggs and bread in the kitchen. Thought you could use a proper breakfast. He placed 2 plates of fried eggs and toast on the table, everything neatly arranged. Steam rose from the cups of coffee he had prepared. "You know, the morning air in this house is incredible," Ryan said, his gaze meeting mine as he pulled out a chair for me. "I think this is the most peaceful place I've ever been." I smiled but said nothing. In that moment, I realized Ryan's presence had transformed this lonely house into a place full of life. We ate breakfast together, the soft morning light streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow on the old wooden table and brightening the room. "Have you always lived here?" Ryan asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. I nodded, setting my coffee cup down. "After I lost Ethan, I couldn't stay in the city. It's more peaceful here." Ryan was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he said, "I understand. I've been running too. Not from a place, but from the feeling that I don't belong anywhere." I looked at him, sensing a deep resonance in his words. "Have you found that place yet?" I asked. Ryan shrugged, his smile carrying a hint of sadness. "Maybe I'm still searching." The space between us felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Instead, it was an unspoken understanding, a connection that didn't need many words. That afternoon, I suggested Ryan help me shovel the snow off the front path. The air was freezing but crisp, and the faint sunlight made the snow sparkle like diamonds scattered across the ground. Ryan grabbed a shovel from the shed and began working, his movements strong and deliberate. I stood nearby, gently sweeping the snow off the railing with a broom. "You don't seem like someone from here. How long have you been in Willow Creek?" I asked, breaking the silence. Ryan paused, leaning on the shovel as he looked toward the distant mountains. "About 3 years. I moved here thinking I needed a fresh start, but honestly, I was just running away." "Running away from what?" Ryan turned to me, his eyes deep and filled with emotion. "Memories. Of a family that never accepted me. Of a youth where I always felt I had to prove something to others." I stood still, his words striking a chord within me, echoes of the wounds I had buried for so many years. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Ryan," I said gently but firmly. "You just need to be true to yourself." The sky began to darken as the sun set, painting the snow in warm hues of orange and gold. We stood together, watching the last rays disappear behind the Rockies. Ryan turned to me, his eyes holding something indescribable. "Sarah, you've changed me. You've made me realize, maybe I don't have to run anymore." My heart raced at his words. Simple, yet sincere, they touched the deepest corners of my soul. "And you've reminded me that I'm still alive, Ryan," I replied, my eyes locked on his. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. It was just us, surrounded by the endless expanse of white, feeling the warmth spreading from our hearts. That evening, after the snow had stopped falling, I prepared a simple dinner of hot soup and bread. Ryan sat at the table, his eyes following me every time I moved around the kitchen. When we finished eating, Ryan picked up his cup of tea, hesitating as though he wanted to say something. Finally, he spoke. "This weekend, the town is holding its annual snow festival. Would you like to go with me?" I was taken aback but smiled. "I haven't been to that festival in years. But with you, I think I'd like to go." Ryan grinned, his smile lighting up the entire room. "Great. I promise it'll be memorable." That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains glistening under the moonlight. My heart no longer felt empty. Ryan's presence had brought something new, not just hope, but a sense of truly being alive. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was ready to move forward, together with Ryan, on this snow-blanketed path. The snow festival in Willow Creek transformed the quiet town into a winter wonderland. Bright lights adorned every house and street, while Christmas music and the joyful buzz of the season filled the air. It was the one time of year this little town came alive, and it was here that Sarah and Ryan faced the first challenges of their budding relationship. I woke up early, a mix of excitement and nervousness stirring within me. It had been years since I last attended the snow festival. Memories of Ethan flooded back, walking through the stalls together, laughing amidst the music. But today was different. I wasn't going alone, nor was I held back by the shadows of the past. Ryan was coming to pick me up. The thought of him warmed my heart more than the steaming coffee on my table. Ryan arrived promptly, dressed in a thick sweater and a gray scarf. His simple attire still carried an undeniable charm. When he stepped inside, the room seemed brighter. "Are you ready?" Ryan asked, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Just a moment. I need to grab my coat," I replied, trying to hide my fluttering nerves as I looked at him. When we reached the town square, the festival was already in full swing. Charming stalls sold decorations, handmade crafts, and steaming hot food. Christmas carols echoed everywhere, blending with the cheerful laughter of the townspeople. Ryan and I wandered through the stalls, each holding a cup of hot cocoa. He was attentive, occasionally adjusting my scarf or checking if I was cold. "Look," Ryan said, pointing to the large ice skating rink where couples and children glided joyfully. "Want to give it a try?" I chuckled softly. The last time I skated was over 20 years ago. I'm not sure I can do it anymore. "Don't worry. I've got you," Ryan replied, his eyes filled with reassurance. He took my hand and led me onto the ice. At first, I stumbled, nearly falling, but Ryan quickly steadied me, his strong arms around my waist. "I told you I'd catch you," he said with a grin, his breath forming a mist in the chilly air. Clinging to him, I felt both nervous and exhilarated. As I grew more comfortable, I let Ryan guide me, each glide becoming smoother. Gentle music played in the background, and colorful lights reflected on the ice, creating a dreamlike scene. "You make me feel young again," I said softly, my words heartfelt. Ryan looked at me, his smile tender. "You're not old, Sarah. You've just forgotten how incredible you are." As we left the rink and passed by a stall, I froze. A woman with short brown hair stood before me, her figure unmistakable. It was Margaret, Ethan's close friend from years ago. "Sarah?" Margaret's voice rose in surprise, her wide eyes locking onto mine. "Hello, Margaret," I replied, keeping my tone calm, though my heart raced. Margaret's gaze shifted to Ryan, lingering on our clasped hands. "So, you found happiness again?" I stiffened, unsure how to respond. Sensing my tension, Ryan gently squeezed my hand, offering silent support. "We're just friends," I said, keeping my voice steady. Margaret smiled, but there was a faint edge to it. Ethan would have been surprised. With that, she walked away, leaving me grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Late that evening, Ryan and I sat by a large bonfire in the festival center. Around us, people laughed and sang, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Ryan leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Don't let what she said get to you. You have the right to live your life." I looked at him, his eyes full of sincerity. "You don't understand. Ethan was my whole world. And now, I'm afraid I'm betraying him." Ryan shook his head, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Sarah, loving Ethan and finding happiness again aren't mutually exclusive. You're not betraying him. You're living, and I believe Ethan would want that for you." His words cut through the fog of guilt that had clouded my heart. I didn't respond, but I nodded slightly, feeling a weight begin to lift. When we left the festival and returned home, I realized something profound. Ryan wasn't just a companion in my solitude. He was helping me confront my past, face my deepest fears, and rediscover the meaning of life. That night, as I lay in bed, the festival lights still shimmered faintly through the window. I knew this journey was far from over, it was only just beginning. The day after the snow festival, Willow Creek returned to its usual quiet. But inside me, a whirlwind of emotions stirred, hope and fear, tangled together. Ryan, the man who had brought a fresh breeze into my life, was now at the center of changes I hadn't thought possible in the stillness of my existence. I woke to pale sunlight seeping through the window. The air still carried the chill of snow, but the house felt oddly warm. Standing by the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee in hand, I gazed at the snow-covered mountains in the distance. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, his words, his gestures, and the steady, gentle way he looked at me. There was something about him that made me feel seen, understood. But Margaret's words from the festival echoed in my mind. Ethan would have been surprised. I set my coffee down, my heart heavy with conflict. Was I moving too quickly into something I wasn't ready for? The sound of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I walked to the door and opened it to find Ryan standing there, holding a brown paper bag. "Good morning," he said, his familiar smile lighting up his face. "I thought you might enjoy some muffins. Got them from the bakery nearby." I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you. Come in, it's freezing out there." Ryan stepped inside, leaving faint traces of snow on the wooden floor. I took the bag from him, the warm aroma of butter and cinnamon filling the room. "You look tired," he remarked, his gaze steady and concerned. "Are you okay?" I nodded slightly. I can't stop thinking about what Margaret said yesterday. About Ethan." Ryan placed a hand on the table and sat across from me. "You don't need to punish yourself, Sarah. Loving Ethan was real, but so is living on. It doesn't diminish what you had with him. Everyone deserves a chance at happiness." His words were like a balm to old wounds. I nodded, the tightness in my chest easing a little. "This weekend, I want to take you somewhere," Ryan said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Where?" I asked, curiosity creeping into my voice. "A short trip out of town. I want you to see there's more to life than the memories you're holding on to." I hesitated, but the enthusiasm in his voice was infectious. "All right. But you have to promise not to make me fall on the snow again," I said, smiling faintly. "You won't fall if I'm there," he replied, his smile radiating a calm reassurance. That evening, as I sat by the window and watched the golden glow of lights from neighboring houses, I thought of Ethan. I remembered the cold winter nights when we sat by the fire, hand in hand, dreaming about the future. For the first time, I wondered, if Ethan were here, would he want me to live like this, buried in memories? Or would he want me to move forward? A mix of emotions flooded my heart. But deep down, I knew Ryan was right. I deserved to live, not to forget Ethan, but to love myself enough to seek happiness again. On Saturday morning, Ryan arrived in his old pickup truck. As I climbed in, he smiled, his eyes brimming with excitement. "Ready?" he asked, his voice carrying a subtle encouragement. I nodded, anticipation bubbling inside me. "I think I'm ready." The truck rumbled down snow-covered roads, leaving clear tire tracks in its wake. Willow Creek gradually faded into the distance, and ahead of me lay a journey I never thought I'd embark on. I didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to move forward. Beside me was Ryan, a man whose future with me was uncertain, but someone I was willing to take a chance on. Whether the snow melted or not, I knew something within me was beginning to bloom, like the first light of spring breaking through the winter frost. The pickup truck bounced gently as Ryan navigated the snow-laden roads. The winter sky loomed gray and heavy, casting an icy stillness over the landscape. Inside the cab, the old heater struggled to keep us warm, yet the atmosphere felt oddly comforting. Ryan glanced at me occasionally, his focus on the road softened by a flicker of amusement. "I know what you're thinking," he said, a playful smile curling at the edge of his lips. "Oh, really?" I chuckled, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth. "What do you think I'm thinking?" "You're wondering why you agreed to get into this truck with a younger guy you've only recently gotten to know," he replied, his tone teasing but perceptive. I laughed, the sound breaking the quiet space of the cab. "Maybe you're right. But I'm also wondering the opposite, why you wanted to bring me on this trip in the first place. Ryan shrugged, his gaze fixed on the endless white road ahead. There's something about you, Sarah. Something that makes me want to show you a different view of the world, the way I once found it when I stepped out of my own shadows. I was taken aback, his sincerity cutting through the casual tone. His words carried a depth I hadn't expected, and for a moment, all I could do was watch him, feeling the weight of his honesty. After 2 hours, Ryan pulled into a small roadside inn. The building, made of weathered wood, had a snow-covered roof and warm golden light spilling from its windows, beckoning us inside. Let's take a break here, Ryan said, hopping out of the truck and opening my door for me. As I stepped into the inn, the smell of freshly baked bread and steaming coffee enveloped me, triggering a faint nostalgia for a home I couldn't quite place. We chose a table near the fireplace, where the flames danced, casting a warm glow on Ryan's face and lighting up his eyes with a quiet brilliance. So, he said, setting down 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Do you want to know where we're headed? I think I'd rather let it be a surprise, I replied with a faint smile. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his gaze studying me thoughtfully. Have you ever thought about starting over, Sarah? A new life in a new place? The question caught me off guard, piercing through my carefully constructed walls. I don't know, I admitted, my voice faltering. Willow Creek feels like a part of me now. Sometimes, to find ourselves, we have to step out of what's familiar, he said, his voice low and steady. When we resumed our journey, the scenery began to change. Snow-covered hills gave way to a wilder, more rugged landscape, where tall evergreens reached skyward, their branches heavy with snow. Eventually, Ryan turned off the main road, stopping in an open clearing surrounded by forest. A frozen lake stretched out before us, its surface like a mirror reflecting the muted light of the gray sky. This is what I wanted you to see, he said, stepping out of the truck and offering his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his grip even through the thick gloves. The scene before me stole my breath, a serene expanse of ice framed by towering pines, their silhouettes stark against the wintry backdrop. This is where I come when I need to think, Ryan said quietly. Whenever I feel lost, this place reminds me that everything can begin anew, even when the world feels frozen. I looked at him, the peace in his expression unlike anything I'd ever seen. You didn't just bring me here for the view, did you? Ryan turned to me, a gentle smile playing on his lips. No, Sarah. I brought you here to show you that sometimes, with just a little courage to step out of the old, we can find something far more beautiful. The sun sank behind the tall trees, leaving a fiery streak of orange and red across the frozen lake. The snow surrounding us sparkled like countless tiny crystals, each breath forming a faint cloud in the crisp winter air. I stood beside Ryan, my hands buried in the pockets of my coat, feeling the occasional icy breeze sweeping off the lake. He stood close, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his face bathed in the soft glow of the sunset. It's beautiful, I whispered, afraid to disturb the serene perfection of the moment. Yes, it is, Ryan replied, his voice low. But not because of the view. I turned to look at him, and for the first time, the space between us seemed to disappear entirely. The world around us faded, leaving only his deep blue eyes, sincere and unyielding. My breath caught as he stepped closer, his hands brushing mine. Even through the thick gloves, I felt a warmth that pierced the cold. Sarah, he said, his voice steady yet gentle, you make me feel alive again. No fear. No aimlessness. Just life. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know how to respond, but I felt the truth in every word he spoke. Ryan, I began, my voice trembling but full of emotion, you make me feel. I don't know. Like I can finally let go of the weight I've carried for so long. Ryan didn't say anything more. Instead, he gently cupped my face, his eyes searching mine, silently asking for permission. I closed my eyes, and then his lips met mine, soft and tender, like a fleeting breeze brushing across my skin. The kiss began with hesitation, as if we were both unsure, but soon deepened, growing more passionate. His warmth enveloped me, and in that moment, I felt his sincerity in every touch. The world seemed to dissolve, no wind, no cold, not even time. There was only the safety and completeness of being in his arms. As night fell, Ryan built a small fire by the edge of the lake. The flames flickered across his face, accentuating his strong features and softening his gaze. We sat close, sharing the fire's warmth and each other's presence. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me closer. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady, calming rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you regret this?" Ryan asked softly, his voice tentative, as though fearing my answer. I lifted my head to meet his eyes. "No, Ryan. This is the most right thing I've done in years." His smile lit up his face, and in that moment, I felt like the only person in the world. That night, we didn't leave each other's side. Words weren't necessary, we found solace and connection in the quiet. The biting cold of winter no longer mattered because Ryan had become the flame that kept me warm. I knew tomorrow would bring new challenges and unanswered questions, but tonight, I didn't care. Tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, not to a house or a place, but to a person. As we left the lake and returned to the truck, I realized I'd left a part of my pain behind on that frozen expanse. Ryan wasn't just my companion on this journey, he was the light guiding me out of the darkness I had trapped myself in for so long. And for the first time, I felt ready to move forward, not to forget, but to truly live. Winter was slowly fading, yet Willow Creek remained cloaked in its blanket of snow. The days I had spent with Ryan had changed everything about my life. However, every journey must come to an end, and the secrets of the past cannot remain hidden forever. One morning, as I was tidying the kitchen, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Margaret stood there, holding an envelope in her hand. "Sarah, I wasn't sure if I should give this to you," she said, her expression uneasy. "But I think you need to read it." I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. After Margaret left, I returned to the kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from Ethan, written before he passed away. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. I know you'll grieve, and you may not allow yourself to love again. But I'm writing this so you'll understand that I want you to keep living. You don't need to cling to the memories of me. Let them be a beautiful part of who you are, but not a chain that holds you back. You deserve to love, to be happy, and to live again. I've always believed you would find that." I placed the letter down, tears streaming down my face. That afternoon, Ryan came to my house as usual. But this time, I couldn't hide the turmoil in my heart. "Are you okay, Sarah?" Ryan asked, his eyes filled with concern. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his face growing more solemn with each line. "Ethan loved you deeply," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "Yes, he did," I replied, my gaze distant. "And that's why I can't keep living this way, Ryan. I can't let the past hold me back any longer. But at the same time, I can't love you until I've learned to love myself first." Ryan's expression softened, his eyes full of emotion. "Sarah, I don't want to push you into anything. I just want you to know that I'll be here when you're ready." A few days later, I made a decision I had avoided for years. I chose to leave Willow Creek. "I think I need a fresh start," I told Ryan on my last afternoon in town. "A place where I'm not haunted by old memories." Ryan nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "I understand. You need time to rediscover yourself. But I hope that one day, we'll meet again." We embraced one final time, neither of us needing to say anything more. The bus taking me out of Willow Creek rumbled along snow-covered roads. I sat by the window, watching the snowy streets, the rolling hills, and the frozen lake where Ryan and I had shared unforgettable moments. In my hand, I held Ethan's letter and a small photograph of Ryan and me from the snow festival. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain: for the first time in years, I felt free. I was no longer a woman trapped in the past. I was Sarah, someone ready to move forward and embrace whatever life had in store.